In a town called Dwele, there was a girl. Her name was Elsie. A girl who once lived a life full of warmth and love in the small cozy house she called home. Her parents had been her world, her mother a gentle soul with a heart full of wisdom, and her father a hard-working man whose laughter filled every room. But all that changed in a blink of an eye. It happened so quickly, too quickly for Elsie to even process. It was a rainy evening, a kind where the world feels damp and gray, and the street became sleek with water. Elsie had been sitting in the passenger seat, her mother driving, as they made their way home from the market. The wipers on the car moved in quick, frantic sweeps, barely keeping up with the heavy downpour. Suddenly, the sound of tires crashing against the wet road filled the air, followed by a sharp, deafening thud. Everything seemed to spin out of control in an instant. Elsie barely had time to grasp what was happening before the car was tossed violently to the side, smashing into a tree with a bone-crushing force. The world outside the car went silent. Elsie could feel her heart hammering in her chest, but everything else seemed to move in slow motion. Her mother's head hit the steering wheel, her body slammed forward in a natural way, and blood stained the dashboard. Elsie, disoriented and shaken, struggled to open her eyes. Her seatbelt had pressed painfully against her chest, and her head throbbed with pain where it had been hit by the car window. "Mom?" Elsie whispered, but her voice barely a breath. She tried to move, but her body felt like it had been made of stone. She reached out to touch her mother's shoulder, shaking her lightly, but there was no response. The only sound that followed was the rain beating steady against the broken windows. A few moments passed, though it felt like an eternity. Elsie tried to unbuckle her seatbelt, her hands trembling, but it wouldn't come loose. The car was still running, engines sputtering as the smell of smoke and gasoline filled the air. Panic surged through her. She finally managed to get free, scrambling out of the car, her legs shaky beneath her. The cold rain hit her like ice as she ran to the driver's side, a heart in her throat. The scene was a nightmare. Her mother's body hung limp, lifeless in the seat, her face pale and cold to touch. Elsie tried desperately to wake her up, shaking her harder now, but there was no response. It wasn't until she heard the distant sounds of siren that she realized the true depths of the loss. Her parents, her entire world, were gone, taken in an instant by fate, and she was left standing alone in the rain, with nothing but silent and shattered dreams. Elsie had never imagined how empty a house could feel, how silent she could be, the loudest thing in the world. The days blurred together as she moved through them like a ghost, feeling nothing but the crushing weight of her own grief. Every corner of her home echoed with memories of her parents, the worn-out couch where her father used to sit, the kitchen where her mother would hum while cooking dinner, the soft scent of her mother's perfume that still lingered in the air. Everything reminded her that they were gone, leaving her in a place that no longer felt like home. The grief was unbearable. It sat in her chest like a heavy stone, suffocating her with every breath. She would wake up in the morning, not from rest, but from a deep and relenting sadness that never left. Sometimes she would lie in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything had changed so quickly, how she had gone from being a daughter to nothing, alone. The weight of her financial troubles only added to the suffocating pressure. Bills stacked up like mountains, each one a reminder that her parents' debt had become hers to bear. The small savings they had left behind had vanished in a few months, consumed by the funeral expenses, medical bills, and endless calls from creditors. Elsie had to work constantly. Her shift at the diner were long, the hours stretching into the early morning, but it was never enough. The tips were small, the paychecks majors, and even after working tirelessly, there was no room to breathe. She cut corners, skipping meals, and wearing the same clothes to stretch her already dwindling resources. But no matter how hard she worked, it never felt like enough. The mounting stress of surviving from paycheck to paycheck slowly eroded the small silver of hope she had. Her fear of the future crept in like an unwelcome shadow. There was no clear path ahead, no comfort, no one to tell her it would get better. She had nothing, not even the assurance that she could pay the rent for the next month. Even her best friend Amelia, in all her kindness, couldn't fill the space left in her heart. She had her own life, her own plans. She didn't want to be a burden. She didn't want to lean on Amelia too much, especially because she knew Amelia was doing a lot for her. Elsie had been living with Amelia for nearly 6 months now. Though Amelia's house was cozy and warm, it was starting to feel like a temporary shelter. Amelia was kind, offering support in every way she could, but there was a limit to what she could provide. One chilly evening, Elsie sat at the kitchen table, staring at a pile of bills she had no idea how to pay. Amelia was next to her, sorting through her own papers, but it was clear that she wasn't just focused on her work. Amelia had been quiet for days now, as though she was thinking about something, weighing the pros and cons of saying it out loud. Finally, she broke the silence. "You know," Amelia began, her voice soft as though testing the waters, "I've been thinking about how hard you've been working. It's not enough. You're killing yourself trying to keep up." Elsie glanced up, meeting her friend's eyes. "I know, I don't know what else to do. I can't let us lose everything, Amelia." Amelia hesitated for a moment, then spoke again, her words stumbling out more quickly. "Well, I've seen something that might help. A few of my friends, they have been dating older men, not just anyone, though. We are talking about rich guys. They spoil them. I've seen it with my own eyes. They're buying expensive clothes, new cars, and everything nice. They're living lives that you and I could only dream of." Elsie blinked, confused. "Older men? Like, how old?" "Some of them are in their 40s, 50s, even 60s, Amelia said, looking down at the bills. "But, I mean, they are rich, they are powerful, and they have money to spare. What's the harm, right? You need money and they want company. It's a fair trade." Elsie felt a twist in her stomach. The thought of dating someone so much older than her made her feel sick, but the reality of the situation was sinking in. She looked at Amelia, her gaze torn. "I don't know, Amelia. It feels wrong. I don't want to be like that." "I get it," Amelia said gently, leaning closer. "But my friend, I've watched you struggle for months now. Your barely gets it by, and it's only getting harder. This could change everything for you. You could be free from all this stress, the constant worry about bills, rent, and food. You could have the things you deserve." Elsie's mind raced. The thought of escaping the endless cycle of debt and exhaustion was tempting. She imagined the life she could have, no more sleepless nights, no more staring at bills in despair. She could buy nice clothes, walk around town without feeling ashamed of her worn-out shoes, perhaps even drive a car that didn't sound like it was on its last leg. But then she thought of her mother's warning, of the love and respect she had always been taught to cherish. Elsie had always dreamed of a true connection, not a relationship that felt transactional or empty. Yet as the days went by, her financial troubles grew. The temptation of a quick solution kept gnawing at her. Amelia could see the conflict in Elsie's eyes. "Look," she continued, "I'm not saying you have to do anything you're not comfortable with, but sometimes you have to do things you never thought you would do just to survive." Elsie's hands trembled as she wiped her eyes, trying to hold back the tears. Her heart ached as she thought about how far she had fallen, how desperate she had become. She wasn't sure she could keep living like this. "Just think about it," Amelia added softly. "I want to see you happy again. It deserves better than this." The days following Amelia's suggestion were filled with confusion and quiet contemplation. Elsie lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, hearing the words echo in her mind. "You could have everything you ever wanted. Just think about it." One day, while walking home after another exhausting shift at the diner, Elsie found herself standing on a street corner, the cool breeze tugging at her hair, her thoughts wandering back to the conversation she had with Amelia. She tried to focus on anything else, but her mind kept returning to the same place, that gnawing thought, what if it could be different? What if I could just, escape? As if on cue, a sleek black sport car pulled up beside her, its engine purring softly, making her pause. The car was impossibly shiny, its windows tinted, the kind of car that screamed to wealth. It came to a smooth stop, and for a moment, Elsie just stared at it, feeling both awe and unease. The driver's side window rolled slowly, and for a moment, Elsie forgot how to breathe. A man sat behind the wheel, his face partially obscured by the shadows from the tinted glass. He was older, perhaps in his mid-40s, his features sharp and refined. He had dark hair that was slightly graying at the temples, and his suit was immaculate, the kind of dark, expensive fabric that she had seen in magazines. His presence was commanding, almost too polished. The car felt like an extension of him, all smooth edges and silent power. "Excuse me?" His voice was smooth, almost too calm, like he had all the time in the world. "I'm looking for the best way to get to River Road. Can you help me with the directions?" Elsie was taken aback by the question, unsure of what to make of it. The car, the man, it was all so out of place. She blinked, forcing herself to focus on the question, but her mind was racing. Sure," she said, her voice shaky. "You'll want to go straight down this road for about 2 blocks, then take a left at the traffic light." The man nodded, his gaze fixed on her. Something about the way he looked at her made her stomach flutter, though she couldn't tell if it was with excitement or discomfort. He smiled, a slow, calculated smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thank you," he said, his voice warm, as though he genuinely appreciated her help. Then, without missing a beat, he added, "By the way, I don't think I've seen you around before. May I ask your name?" Elsie hesitated, feeling a strange mix of flattery and worriness. "Elsie," she replied, her voice quieter now. She couldn't help but notice how his eyes lingered on her, how the smile didn't faint but deepened. "Nice to meet you, Elsie," he said, his voice almost too smooth. "My name is Victor. Would you be willing to share your number with me? I would love to take you out sometime." She found herself nodding. "Sure," she whispered. She received his phone and typed in her number. As she handed it to him, she felt a strange mix of emotions, excitement, guilt, and even a sense of dread all coiled into one. Was this the start of something new, or was it a path that she might regret? Victor took the phone, his fingers brushing lightly against hers as she handed it back. "I'll call you soon, Elsie. I'm looking forward to getting to know you better," he said with that same knowing smile and true voice. A few days later, Elsie's phone rang. It was Victor. She hesitated before answering, her heart pounding in her chest. "Hello, Elsie." His voice was calm and deep. "I've been thinking about our conversation. Would you be interested in joining me for dinner tonight? There's a place I'd like to take you. It's quite special." Her mind raced. Dinner? A date? She thought about the bill stacked on her desk, the rent due in a few days. Amelia's word echoed in her mind. This could change everything. "I'd love to," she said, her voice almost a whisper. She felt a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. Maybe this is the start of something. Maybe this is the answer to her problems. That evening, Elsie found herself in front of a luxurious restaurant, its glowing light casting long shadows on the street. Victor was already waiting for her, his black car parked by the entrance. He greeted her with the same confident smile, taking her hand gently as he guided her inside. The night unfolded with fine wine, delicate courses, and soft conversation. Elsie tried to stay present, but the unease never fully left her. As the evening went on, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was crossing a line, one that, once crossed, might change everything she knew about herself. At first, everything had seemed perfect. They went on extravagant dates, private dinners, expensive wine, and luxurious trips. Elsie could almost forget the pain of losing a parent and the struggle of keeping up with the bills. She felt that was a part of the world she had never been before, a world of power, wealth, and influence. But everything changed when Victor crashed. His life, which had seemed so secure, unraveled faster than she could have imagined. It started subtly. Victor's business deals began to fall through, small failures here and there, then it escalated into something catastrophic. A single bad investment snowballed into a massive loss, and before long he was bankrupt. He was forced to sell his properties and cut off most of his luxuries. The same lavish lifestyle that had attracted Elsie to him vanished in the blink of an eye. But that wasn't the worst part. As his financial world crumbled, so did Victor. He became withdrawn and angry. His charm faded, replaced by bitterness. Elsie watched helplessly as the man who once given her everything she thought she would fell into despair. Then one morning, she received a call. Victor had died. His heart had given out, overwhelmed by the stress, his body unable to bear the weight of the loss he had suffered. Elsie began to wonder, could it be her? Could she be the reason for his downfall? She pushed the thought out. It couldn't be. It had to be bad luck or something else. But then came her Lord. After Victor's death, Elsie had taken a break from dating. The tragedy of Victor's passing shocked her, but the allure of wealth and comfort crept back into her thoughts as she continued to struggle with bills. That's when she met her Lord, a self-made businessman who had built a successful company from the ground up. He was older than Victor, but his confidence and success drew Elsie in once again. Their relationship had been nothing short of glamorous. Harold took her on weekend getaways, drove her in his sleek black sports car, and pampered her with expensive gifts. But soon, the same pattern started to unfold. Harold's business began to take hit. At first, it was small loss contracts, a few clients pulling out, then it grew worse. The economy hit hard, and Harold's empire, one he had spent his life building, began to crumble. Elsie tried to ignore it at first, tried to believe that this was just another coincidence. But when Harold's company was publicly accused of a major financial scandal, Elsie knew something was terribly wrong. He lost everything, his company, his wealth, his status, and just like Victor, he began to change. The man who had once been so confident and powerful became a shadow of himself, consumed by the loss. Elsie could feel the bitterness creeping in, but this time it wasn't just him, it was her too. She had to leave him behind as he sank deeper into despair, and soon after, she heard that Harold moved away, practically destitute. She couldn't help but feel the growing weight of guilt pressuring on her chest. She had tried to convince herself that it wasn't her fault, but it was just bad timing. But the coincidences were becoming impossible to ignore. Still, Elsie pushed those thoughts aside. It's not me, I'm just trying to survive. And then came Gregory, a retired politician. His wealth, his status, his charm was everything she wanted. They started dating after chance encounter at an art exhibit. Gregory was kind to her, generous and attentive. He would often take her to elegant gatherings, introduce her to influential people, and showered her with gifts. But as their relationship deepened, things began to take a darker turn. Gregory fell ill, seemingly out of nowhere. It started as a small cough, nothing serious, but then his health deteriorated rapidly. The doctors couldn't explain it. It wasn't the flu or any other common illness. It was something far more serious, and it took hold of him quickly. Within months, he was bedridden. Elsie sat by his side, watching as the man withered away. His family was distant, barely involved in his care. He had no friends left to visit him. Gregory had everything: money, power, influence, and yet it had all taken from him in a matter of months. Elsie began to feel trapped. Could this be another coincidence? Could she be the reason all this is happening, she felt like she was sinking into a sea of confusion. Then after Gregory came Charles. Charles, a widowed millionaire with a gentle smile. Elsie, feeling the weight of her losses, thought maybe this time would be different. Maybe Charles would be the one who would bring her happiness without the distraction that seems to follow her every step. But once again, the pattern emerged. Charles was wealthy, yes, but his life was already starting to crack at the seams. Within weeks of dating him, his business deals started to follow through. His investments soared. The man who had once been the epitome of success now found himself in scandals. Rumors of mismanagement and shady deals spread like wildfire. Before long, his wealth began to slip away, and his life spiraled downward. Elsie could no longer deny it. It wasn't just bad luck. There was something wrong, something she couldn't explain. And no matter how hard she tried to push the thoughts away, one horrifying truth began to settle in her mind. It's me. It wasn't until one night, sitting alone in her apartment after the end of her relationship with Charles, that Elsie finally understood the truth. The pattern had been clear all along. She could no longer chalk it up to coincidence. She had been part of each man's downfall, like a shadow that clung to them, bringing destruction in its wake. As questions ran in her mind, she couldn't ignore the warning bells that had begun to ring in her head. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and it wasn't just the men who suffered, it was her too. Elsie began to wonder, was she losing herself bit by bit as well? Elsie had been feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders ever since the last disaster. The endless cycles of loss, illness, and death had consumed her, and each passing day felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Every time she tried to move forward, something or someone would pull her back into that destructive spiral. Victor, her lord, Gregory, Charles, they were all gone. Their lives shattered in ways that made no sense. Elsie had tried to distance herself, convincing herself that the disasters were just bad luck, unfortunate coincidences. But the nagging voice in the back of her mind wouldn't let her forget. How could she keep dating older men only to watch them suffer? How could she ignore the strange sense of doom that seemed to surround her every time she got close to one? She had started to isolate herself, thinking that maybe if just she stayed away from all of it, staying away from men, from the luxuries they offered, everything would go back to normal. But it didn't. The feeling of dread never left. The pattern was undeniable. It wasn't until one particular night when Elsie was pacing around her small apartment, feeling lost and hopeless, that the thought struck her. She hadn't heard about her family's history over the years, but her Aunt Evelyn, had always been distant and rarely spoke of the family's history. But now Elsie was desperate. She needed answers. She needed to know if there was something deeper at play. The sadness of it all, it had felt too real, too personal. And then the realization dawned on her. What if this wasn't just about bad luck? What if there was something else, something in her bloodline, something that she didn't know? Elsie had always been closer to her aunt, but they had grown apart over the years. She didn't know about Evelyn's past, just that she had always seemed to carry a heavy burden. But it was Evelyn who had always been the quiet one, the one who seemed to know more about the family than anyone else. Her fingers hovered over the phone, dialing her aunt's number before she even realized it. The phone rang twice before Evelyn's familiar voice picked up. Elsie, what's the matter? Evelyn asked, her tone warm but tinged with concern. I need to talk to you, Elsie said, her voice cracking. There's something I can't explain. I need you to tell me about our family. Please, Aunt Evelyn. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Elsie could feel her aunt's hesitation, but then, in a soft voice, Evelyn replied, Come over. We need to talk. Elsie didn't waste any time. She grabbed her coat and headed straight to Evelyn's house. What was she going to hear? She was anxious. As she drove, she thought about the rumors she had heard in the past. whispers at family gatherings about street occurrences, broken relationships, misfortunes following the man in their family. She had brushed them aside as superstition or old stories passed down over the years. But now, standing at the crossroads of our suffering, the weight of those rumors seemed far too real. Elsie's mind raced, and she found herself gripping the steering wheel tightly, as though holding on to control in a world that had become increasingly unpredictable. Each time she met a new man, each time she thought she had fought her way out of her struggles, the consequences became more devastating. Was this really just a coincidence? By the time she pulled up to Auntie Evelyn's house, it was nearly dark. The old house sat in the middle of a quiet neighborhood. Elsie took a deep breath before stepping out of the car. She went directly and knocked the door. Evelyn opened it almost immediately, her eyes soft with sympathy, but there was a quiet sadness in her gaze that Elsie has never seen before. She stepped inside without a word, the door closing behind with a soft thud. And Evelyn led her to the living room, where the fire crackled softly in the hearth. The air was warm and comforting, but Elsie felt cold to the bone. She sat down on the plush armchair across her hand waiting. Evelyn sat down beside her, her expression serious. There was no beating around the bush. Elsie knew her aunt was about to tell her something life-altering, something that would change everything. Elsie? Evelyn began slowly, her voice soft but firm. What you have been experiencing isn't a coincidence. It's something much older, something that has been passed down through our family for generations. And I think you need to know the truth before it's too late. Elsie's breath caught. The truth? What truth? And Evelyn took a deep breath before continuing. It all starts with your grandmother, the curse she placed on our family, and why she did it. I've been thinking and waiting for you to ask me this, Elsie. I wish I could tell you this is just bad luck. That says a simple explanation, but that isn't. You have been affected by something much older and darker than anything you could have imagined. Elsie leaned forward, her breath catching in her throat. What do you mean? What's happening to me? And Evelyn sighed deeply, her eyes searching Elsie's face as if weighing her next words carefully. It's a curse, Elsie. A curse that has been passed down through the women in our family for generations. It all started with your grandmother. Elsie's mind spun. A curse? Her grandmother? I don't understand, Elsie said, her voice cracking. What does that have to do with me? What curse? Evelyn slowly stood up and walked over to the old wooden bookshelf in the corner. She pulled down a dusty photo album and placed it carefully in front of Elsie. As the pages flipped open, Elsie saw images of a much younger woman, her grandmother, with soft eyes and a gentle smile, standing beside a much older, graying man. The man's face looked stern, his eyes cold and distant. He was much older than her grandmother, at least 30 or 40 years older than her grandmother. That man, Evelyn said quietly, her fingers tracing the photograph, was your grandmother's husband. She was only 15 when she was forced to marry him. Elsie's eyes widened in shock. What? 15? But why would she marry someone so much older? Evelyn's face tightened, her eyes clouded with emotion. It wasn't her choice. Your grandmother was born into a family that was desperate. Her parents were poor. And that was the type. Parents were poor. And when an older wealthy landowner came to them with an offer of marriage, they saw it as a way to secure a future. They pushed your grandmother into it. She had no say in the matter. She was young, vulnerable, and they promised her a life of comfort, but the reality was far different. Elsie's stomach churned as she listened, unable to imagine the heartbreak her grandmother must have felt. 15, a child forced into marriage with a man who could have been her grandmother. She hated him, Evelyn continued, her voice thick with emotion. He was cruel, controlling, and cold. He saw her as a little more than a possession, and over the years, your grandmother grew to despise him. She was trapped in a life she never wanted, bound to a man who was nothing like what she had dreamed of. Elsie could barely breathe, her heart aching for the woman in the photo, the same woman whose spirit had watched over her as a child, the woman who had never known to suffer in such a way. She had never imagined the pain her grandmother had endured. Did she try to leave him? Elsie whispered. Evelyn shook her head slowly. No, she couldn't. Divorce wasn't an option back then. Women had no right, no power, so she endured. For years, she endured. But as time went on, she began to realize something. If she couldn't escape him, she could at least ensure that no other woman in our family would ever suffer the same fate. Your grandmother was a woman of great strength. Despite what she went through, Evelyn continued, when she reached her breaking point, she made a decision. She would ensure that no woman in our family would ever be forced into the same kind of life she had. So she placed a curse on all the women in our bloodline. Elsie's breath itched. A curse? A curse to protect us? Evelyn nodded. Her eyes sad but resolute. She cast a spell, one that would punish any woman in our family that dared to love or marry an older man. It didn't matter how much wealth, power, or comfort he promised. If they chose to be with a man who was too old for them, they would face terrible consequences. For your grandmother, it was a way of taking control, of ensuring that no future generation would be forced into the same hellish marriage she had endured. Elsie's world seemed to spin. She could hardly breathe. Was this why every man she dated had suffered such misfortune? But why did she tell us? Elsie asked, her voice trembling. Why didn't she tell anyone? Why didn't she warn anyone? Evelyn lowered her gaze, her voice filled with regret. Your grandmother didn't want us to know. She thought we could live free of the curse if we didn't know about it. But now it's affecting you, Elsie, and it's not something you can run from. The curse is real. Elsie felt overwhelmed by the weight of the curse. But instead of being in despair, she made a decision. She was done with the older men. No more using them for security or falling into a pattern that only led to pain and loss. Elsie chose to live for herself, focusing on her independence, hard work, and genuine connection. The more she distanced herself from the world, the more the shadow of the curse seemed to fade. Elsie worked harder, took up new hobbies, and spent time with people who valued her for who she truly was. And then one beautiful and sunny evening, she met Andrew. A kind man, handsome and caring, appeared in her life. They spent hours talking, and for the first time, Elsie felt a sense of peace. No games, no expectations, just a real connection. Weeks later, Aunt Evelyn called Elsie sounding urgent. You need to come over. I figured something out. At Evelyn's house, Elsie learned something unbelievable. You have broken the curse. Evelyn said, her voice filled with awe. By choosing your own path, by rejecting the sake of the path, you have freed yourself and us all. Elsie sat in stunned silence, realizing that by living authentically, she had shattered the curse that had haunted the family for generations. She no longer needed the approval of older men to feel validated. She had done it on her own, and in doing so, she had freed herself. Later that evening, Elsie felt lighter than she had in years. She was walking into a new chapter of her life, one she had the power to create. As she checked her phone, a message from Aunt Evelyn popped up. The curse is gone. You are enough, Elsie. With a smile, Elsie knew she had broken free. The future was hers to shape, and it was brighter than she ever imagined. So from this story, always choose your own path, and don't let anyone else choose it for you. The end. Bye!